Great, good morning. Well, first I want to thank Mr. Executive and Madam President for their presentation. I think we're all really excited for what's to come in the Baltimore region more generally with some of these catalytic projects, and I'm very pleased to be joined by Katie, Mina, and Keenan to talk a little bit about the big question, which is how do we actually pay for this stuff? And so, we've heard a lot about these committed projects, about these visions that we have to make Baltimore and the region more dynamic, more livable, more transit-oriented, to be reflective of a 21st century paradigm for a city. But we do need to figure out how to pay for all the things that we have on our wish list. And so I wanted to start with Katie. You're kind of on the front lines of these big projects, both in the city and in the region. How are you seeing financing moving forward? What are some of the challenges, and have you seen kind of the environment shift at all in your time with MEDCO?
Absolutely. Thank you, Adam. And I want to lay a little context on our financing so everyone kind of understands where this perspective is coming from. And so we support the real estate development and financing needs for government, private sector, universities, and nonprofits. And we can support projects across the entire life cycle, from advisory services to financing, development, construction, and even asset management. And so we issued about over $1 billion worth of financing last year. Many of those were infrastructure projects, from energy systems, student housing, transportation, recreational facilities, and even resilience infrastructure addressing climate impacts we're seeing in different areas of the state. But the challenges tend to be very similar across those projects. And we have budget constraints, local, county, state, federal. I think everyone is experiencing those. And infrastructure projects tend to have massive upfront capital costs, and they take a long time to start generating returns, or can take a long time to start generating returns. We're seeing limited local capacity to manage very complex projects. We're definitely seeing issues around bureaucratic and regulatory challenges. I'm sure everyone in the room has experienced those, and trying to find paths forward that work for our public and our private partners. And one thing we don't talk about often enough is ongoing maintenance costs. So we often see those are the first pieces that get pushed aside when there's a budget constraint, yet they create significant fiscal impacts and reduce the usable life of assets that could generate returns for several more decades if they were cared for properly. So I think those are the main challenges that we're seeing. From a solution perspective, we had a period of time in which there was a flow of money and subsidy coming in, much of that federal into the state, and we didn't have to be as creative with our solutions. But all of the projects and all of those infrastructure projects that I kind of referenced are public-private partnerships. That is what we are seeing as a solution. Is it's speeding up delivery, it's reducing costs, and it's allowing us to bring innovative solutions in by bringing together many different type of partners that have different perspectives and can benefit long-term from their investments. So we're encouraging people to be curious, to be open, and it's how do you get to yes? And sometimes it's no, and that's okay, but don't leave any of the solutions off the table. We really have to look at all of the options.
Yeah, it sounds like we need to be a little bit creative on some of the things we're doing, which, Mina, gets me to you. Barings does work nationally. I think you have a little bit larger of a lens from some of the work that you do across the country, and I think the question would be, how can Baltimore learn from some of the things that you're seeing nationwide?
Yeah. Well, thank you for having me here. And so I'm here actually representing the Maryland Retirement State System. We run a program for them called Terrapin. There's a Terrapin 1 and Terrapin 2, and we're investing in infrastructure. And actually, Katie was the one that introduced me to this organization, so thank you to Katie. So what is our lens? Our lens is to invest in infrastructure across states and what we call in-state programs. I would say the most important thing that you guys are doing is exactly what is going on here, which is getting everyone in the room, coordinating, and figuring out priorities on what the best opportunities are. The second most important thing is making sure that when you're doing these public-private partnerships, you are generating market-based returns, because you want to attract more dollars to the state. And so as a quick example, one of the programs that we've managed in the past is in Alaska. And everyone's probably like, okay, I don't know how many of you have stepped on in the state, but Alaska is a much more difficult state to run a program. So as a case study, we got $100 million from that program. We attracted $1 billion to the state. And through that program, we're now the 10th largest employer. And so that is really a model that I think would work for Baltimore, that would work for Maryland. And I want to give full credit to, your comptroller, your governor, your treasurer, who were really, behind, and specifically the comptroller Brooke, who really was focused on doing more of this type of programming or more of these types of partnerships, across the state. I know she's a big supporter of MEDCO, but also as you think about the program that we're investing in. So I'll just leave you, we invest in digital, we invest in what I would call the energy transition, transport, mobility, so a lot of the presentations from earlier today, the circular economy, and so we're very excited about the work that we're doing here, and so we can kind of take it in whatever direction you want from there.
Yeah, and it sounds to me like we need some level of investment that we can leverage for future growth, which kind of gets me, Keenan, to you. In Baltimore, let's be real, we have a 4-letter word, and that's TIF. And so, Keenan, with MuniCap, you do the underwriting for the city, you do it across the country, really. Can you talk a little bit about why TIFs are a useful tool and how they can be leveraged in Baltimore?
Well, good morning, everyone. I've had the great opportunity to work on all the TIFs in the city of Baltimore, in fact, all of those in the state of Maryland, and hundreds of others around the country. I've seen a lot of great things accomplished with these TIFs. A very good example is Harbor Point, which is a former contaminated, brownfield site set vacant, dormant for decades, fenced off, some great waterfront property, but no access to the public, no taxes, no jobs. The city used a TIF to help with the redevelopment of that site. Now there's thousands of jobs there, a great amount of tax dollars being generated by that project. Plus, it's been very helpful in keeping industries, either attracting companies to the city or keeping very important companies in the city. However, one thing we've heard a lot from the city over the years is we're doing all these TIFs in neighborhoods that are already attracting investment. What can we do in the neighborhoods that are losing investment? Well, we're very close to doing exactly that. About a year ago, the city council, really under the leadership of the mayor, passed legislation and provided a significant amount of funding for vacant abandoned homes. The city of Baltimore has about 13,000 abandoned homes. Many of these in what are called former red line districts. If you don't know about redlining, it was this really stupid program created by the U.S. government back in the 30s, where they identified neighborhoods throughout the country where it was safe to make a mortgage loan and it wasn't safe to make a mortgage loan. And they had 5 different categories. They color-coded them. The riskiest was red line districts, and they advised lenders not to make loans in these red line districts. Well, no surprise, most of those red line districts were minority districts. In fact, there was only, this is a very sad thing to say, there were only 12 majority-minority neighborhoods in the entire country that were not in red line districts. Okay, well, if you can't get a mortgage, people can't buy a house, people can't sell a house. It's no surprise over the years, many of those houses get run down and eventually abandoned. This is not a problem the private sector can solve on its own, because the value of homes in those neighborhoods is less than what it costs to rehabilitate and build a new house. Well, the city came up with this great idea that many of these properties are on the tax roll at $5,000 to $10,000. If you build a new house or you rehabilitate a house, and these houses are focused on workforce housing, and so those houses, when you rehabilitate them, now they're on the tax roll like $250,000 to $300,000. So it's additional tax revenues, and you do this with thousands of homes throughout the city. It becomes a significant amount of money. So the city has created a TIF that's intended to fund $150 million to provide grants to cover the difference between what it costs to rehabilitate these houses and what people can afford. The goal is to put thousands of homes back on the tax rolls. And there's a real shortage of quality workforce housing in the city of Baltimore. There's plenty of buyers who will buy a house. Many of these buyers end up having to move outside the city to get a quality, affordable house. Well, this is going to provide quality, affordable housing. This is an important concept of livability. We've talked some this morning. It's also a very important concept about economic development, providing and job creation. Because employers, one of the things they look for when they're locating a facility that will create jobs is, are there people to take those jobs? I worked on a major corporate relocation project a number of years ago, and the number one factor in that company and what they were looking for a new location is were there going to be available qualified employees for the jobs that they were going to create. So this is a very important program we're really excited about. We're actually pricing the first bond issue tomorrow, and we're going to close the bond before the end of the year.
That's great news, and I think we all need to remember that housing is infrastructure in a lot of respects, and the more that we can create, the more affordability we can yield for ourselves. And so, Keenan, you're the TIF guy, but I'm going to go back to MEDCO here for a second. One of the issues with TIFs, I think, is the cost of issuance, which includes both the actual costs of furnishing it, but then capitalized interest and reserves that make the investment safer for bondholders. Have you seen some other vehicles that you think could also be paired with or become more efficient than an execution like that?
Sure. So a lot of what MEDCO is doing is revenue-based, so we're issuing revenue-backed bonds. And so property tax is one type of revenue, and we issue TIF bonds and support those types of programs very strongly. But a lot of the creative solutions we're seeing are utilizing other types of revenue in those public-private kind of components, and it can be different types of lease structures. It can be user revenues. We've done recreational facilities. We've done office spaces, energy systems, and all of those things are generating some type of revenue through either a lease or a user that allows us to issue those bonds, and they are repaid then with those revenues. So I think looking at more creative types of revenue solutions. MEDCO spends a lot of time talking to our varying partners and trying to figure out what are the missing pieces in that financing structures. And we've recently launched a strategic infrastructure revolving loan fund that's intended to make targeted investments into real estate development and infrastructure projects that support transformative placemaking, transit-oriented development, and inclusive and equitable growth outcomes. And so we're working to capitalize that fund, but very flexible terms, and we're looking to kind of come in on an early front, make infrastructure investments, help de-risk aspects of that project, so those projects then can go on to close on other types of larger commercial financing, whether that is with us or any other commercial partners. So we're really trying to create solutions that don't currently exist, and we see that infrastructure fund as being one of those paths.
Yeah, well, speaking of committed funds, Mina, Terrapin Fund, you brought that up a little bit. You're doing investments in transportation, digital, energy, as you mentioned. Can you tell the group a little bit about how you plan to deploy those resources here in Maryland?
Yeah. So we don't have a set, those are the sectors we're focused on, but we don't have a set portfolio construction that requires us to be investing in any of those. But what I will say is we are investing in equity-oriented infrastructure. And as I describe it, it's not your grandma's infrastructure, right? We're not talking ports or, railroads. It's usually kind of more on the smaller end. So think edge data centers, think, putting solar and battery up on, an industrial site. And so as we think about that investment, we're really looking to kind of we can take brownfield risk, but we also take greenfield risk. And we're building a project, and we're really stabilizing the cash flows and basically selling it upstream to another larger player who is looking more of that traditional cash flow yield investment from an infrastructure. So how do people work with us? Like, we will finance individual projects. Ideally are permitted on the permitting, already been permitted or almost there. They have some form of a contract, and they really just need that money to kind of execute, where we can participate, do the phase. I would say the most important thing is that we have the Terrapin capital, but our secret sauce is being able to attract additional investors. So Barings is part of the Mass Mutual Insurance platform. We can bring in other insurers to invest in these projects. We can bring other asset managers. We can bring in other states to invest in these projects. But what's critical across the board is being able to generate and being able to say, this isn't just an opportunity that's great for Maryland, it's great for any investor. And that is what's going to get more capital to come here.
Yeah, for those of you in the room who were presenting earlier, Mina was leading over and asking for introductions, so I think she's got some money for you guys. Keenan, this question's for you, but I would love for everybody to weigh in on it. I mean, the elephant in the room, and the Senate President talked a little bit about it. Delegate Edelson talked a little bit about it. Our friends about 35 miles down the road have decided that potentially we don't want to fund some of the transit and infrastructure projects in the Maryland region. Even the Key Bridge is now up for debate. And so, Keenan, I think for you to start, what are some of the ways that we can kind of create our own future for ourselves, recognizing that we're going to have to kind of take those steps?
Well, I hope this is somewhat cyclical. 4 years ago in 2021, the ARPA legislation was passed. The infrastructure bill was passed later that year, provided a very significant amount of money to states and cities. Some of that's been clawed back now, but most of that money has been made available. So hopefully what we're seeing now is not permanent. I don't think there's any way states and cities can fully fund their infrastructure needs without help from the U.S. government. But that said, that's never going to be enough money. It can help, but it's going to be very important for states and cities to be able to fund many of their own projects. And I think there's no silver bullet. There's no one program that's going to really be able to meet those needs. It's going to require looking at a lot of projects, a lot of different sources of funding. General fund or general obligation bonds is always very important, but that's a very finite resource. It can't meet all the needs either. And local governments really need to find means of funding programs that takes pressure off of the general fund. And so I think that requires being creative, flexible, opportunistic, as well as it takes expertise and knowledge and understanding the different programs available, in understanding how to utilize those programs for the right project, because there are many programs that don't fit all projects or needs, but that's an important question is, okay, which program meets particular needs? And I think there are a lot of other programs. We've worked a lot. I know Katie, I've worked with Katie a great deal, and MEDCO. There are different types of programs that can help fund different types of projects, and we need to be looking for those opportunities. We can't just go to the U.S. government, expect it to fund everything. We can't go to the state. We can't look at the city's general fund. There's not enough money there, so we have to be open-minded and look and creative and look for some of these other programs that are available and can help fund these kind of projects. And it's very important to have the assistance from MEDCO. I know they've been very helpful in this. I think a lot of the work that we've done have been very helpful and important in funding. County Executive Ball was talking about Columbia Gateway. We've been working on putting together the funding, important component of the funding for that. That's going to be very important. It's a very exciting project, but the thing about projects, you plan and you design, they don't happen unless you can find the money to pay for it. And so that's really what's critical to make these projects like this happen, and you just have to be creative about putting together funding. But there are many tools out there that can help with the problems.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, one of the things, having been and talked to a lot of states, I would say the one area that I haven't heard a lot of conversation around is really around power and energy. And so affordability is really critical for the average person, right? Like, what's your utility bill, but also to attract businesses to the state. And as you think about, I'm assuming you want to attract more services businesses, right? And what do you need? You need compute power, right? You need to have that availability and accessibility, and obviously the proximity to being DC, Virginia, right, is probably something that you should really benefit from and really kind of use to your advantage. And so that's an area where we're very interested in. I think that's a huge opportunity, because once you attract that, you have a lower cost of energy, you'll attract more businesses, and obviously all those other things that we didn't discuss, whether it's housing, transport, are all just as important.
Yeah, we've all seen those bills coming through in the past year or so. I think the last question, and I'd love to hear from each of you on this, is we have a lot of vision here in Baltimore. We have downtown rise, like Shalonda was talking about. We have transit infrastructure. We have waterfront infrastructure, and we need to position ourselves for growth. What would be your recommendation for how we can execute on a 10-year vision, so that when we're sitting here in 2035, we're looking out the window and seeing all the things that we've been talking about? And Katie, I want to start with you.
It's a big question. I thought
saw
about
you going
this one.
first.
I know, thank you. Actually, this is the one that I was struggling with a bit on my response, and I'm curious what the other panelists will say. But we're in the business of implementation. We're doers, and there is so much incredible planning and thought strategy that has gone into Downtown Rise and GBC's 10-year program. But the key piece is identifying who are the partners that carry those forward. who do you need to have in place to secure the financing, to help structure the deals, to do these different pieces. And there's so many components to those plans, so each of those look different. But I think it comes down to having very actionable steps and breaking each piece apart and identifying who needs to be at the table to actually advance those. And that's the piece that I look forward to working with so many people in this room on and seeing that component come into play. As we've done the planning, now we need to start implementing.
Mina?
Yeah, I wouldn't say I have an idea like specifically which project. So kind of probably along the lines of from Katie. At the end of the day, I think that there are, not just Baltimore, right? Across the state, there are a lot of competing projects. And so what is actionable, market return, is going to attract the most dollars and is going to attract people who are going to want to invest more in the state. And so it's almost going to create this kind of flywheel effect, right? Where if you have your first initial investments or projects across what you all are doing being incredibly successful, it's going to attract national attention. And I think that would be the priority from my perspective, is what's going to attract national attention to bring much more in terms of dollars to your state.
Well, I'm very bullish in Baltimore. I think Baltimore has so many assets and is really often very underrated. I moved here 35 years ago. At that time, I was in Southern California. And when I first told my wife my work was leading me here, I was going to need to move to Baltimore to continue my work, her response was, well, if you're really going to have to move, we're going to miss you. But nonetheless, she came, and she's fallen in love with Baltimore, Maryland, just as I have. I think the key to the future, I think, number one, Baltimore really has a lot of assets, a lot going for it, as does the state of Maryland. But it has a lot of challenges. You see that really in every city all over the country. We work in over 30 states around the country. It's, all the cities in the country have these kind of issues. But I think the solution, and I think someone earlier today, this morning mentioned it, it's really all the people here. It takes a lot of people making effort, providing leaderships. There's a lot of different efforts that are required. There's no one single solution to the problems, but it's really all the people here taking the initiative, putting in effort, being thoughtful and creative. And there's, I listened here today about all the things going on and all the people involved. And again, I'm just very impressed. I believe we can handle these challenges and we can find solutions.
Yeah, and I think we're in this moment, as Shalonda would say, where downtown really has a chance to thrive. And as Keenan says, I think it's kind of incumbent upon all of us to position ourselves for that growth. And to be honest, like as Dave Bramble would say, we can't Baltimore this, right? We need to realize that we can grow the pie. We're not trying to steal each other's slices. And I think this notion that we can set out on this trajectory of creating something for everybody and leveraging each other's assets, interconnecting those things, and finding a way to fund them, is ultimately going to get us where we want to go. So thank you all so much for your time. I think I'm going to yield it back over to Mark Anthony Thomas.